Marrying a paralyzed president for her sister, she unexpectedly achieved wealth freedom. I wanted to help my mother's family, but when I got home, I heard my parents' dislike. Isn't this girl living a bad life and still wants to come back? That's not good. How can the plague god who was sent out with difficulty let her come back? The younger sister also pouted and complained. Does she regret marrying that cripple for me? Now I want to come back and take away my Zixuan. I sneered outside the door. Since they are unkind, don't blame me for being unrighteous. 1. Mrs. Mo and Mrs. Lu are good friends with my family, and they have been married since childhood. I married Mo Zixuan and my sister married Lu Tianong. An accident took away Lu Tianong's legs. Since then, he can only live in a wheelchair. My sister doesn't want to marry a cripple. She is noisy at home all day long, which makes the family restless. I don't want to marry a cripple. He is old and lame. If you want to marry yourself, marry yourself. The younger sister was carried away by the anger and pointed at her mother's immoralist words. Mom was so angry that her chest trembled up and down. She raised her hand and slapped her for the first time. Bast! Don't you know what's going on at home? If the marriage with the Lu family is ruined, what about our family's debt? In the early years, our Chung family was also one of the most famous families in the Beijing circle. However, in an economic storm, my father's decision-making mistakes not only buried the Chung family's wealth, but also debts 5 million yuan. Now only 4 people are crowded in a small rental house of 60 square meters. The room is not soundproof at all, and the sound of teeth grinding next door can be heard at night. Chung Yuer covered her red face and twitched. Her eyes were full of tears, but she stubbornly did not want to flow down. She knew that her mother loved her the most and couldn't stand her pitiful appearance. As a result, my mother tremblingly stretched out her hand to comfort her sister, but she dodged her. My mother was so sad that she wrinkled her face into a bitter melon and watched her sister shed tears. Mom also feels sorry for you. She doesn't want you to marry a cripple, but in our family's current situation, she can't refuse. My sister shook off her mother's hand angrily and stared at me. How can she marry Mo Zixuan, who is good-handed? Although Mo Zixuan doesn't have much money, he is young and handsome. Standing aside, I was inexplicably pulled into the smoke. When my mother saw me, a light flashed in her eyes. She clapped her hands and said to her sister with a smile, "Yes. Why don't you two just change it?" Anyway, when I made a marriage contract, I didn't say clearly which one it was. She didn't even want to discuss with me, so she made a hasty decision for me. I have always known that she spoiled her sister, but I didn't expect her to be so unlimited. Just as my father came in from outside the house, I moved my lips to seek justice for myself, but my mother spoke first. She said, "Yang, Mom can't help it." The palms and backs of her hands are full of flesh. Yuer is a student of a famous school. Can you bear to watch your sister marry a cripple? Dad is a businessman and knows the pros and cons best. He understood his mother's intention in an instant and agreed. He opened his mouth to persuade me. Yang, you are my sister. You have enjoyed more blessings than Yuer since you were a child. Now Yuer has a better future, and you shouldn't stop her. At this moment I stood in place like a slug in my throat. I wanted to say something, but I didn't know how to open my mouth. I was only born a month earlier than my sister. I don't want to give her everything, including my happiness, because of this more month's blessing. Seeing that I clenched my fist, I didn't want to let go. My mother took my sister and knelt in front of me, kowtowed to me 3 times. 2. Lu Tianong was originally a genius in the business world. At the age of his early 20s, he had a family property of hundreds of millions. But God was jealous of his talent. A car accident at the age of 30 made him lose his legs. From then on, he was depressed and moody, and hated the scheming woman who took advantage of this to rise to the top. Previously, many women who were drugged and crawled in bed were sent to the situation by him. Since then, he has also hated women. The wedding date came as promised, and I was taken into the Lu family by the Lu family's nanny car in a low-key way. The moment I saw Lu Tianong, I found that he was not the same as the rumored one. On his knife-like face, he was framed with a pair of glasses with gold-rimmed, slender fingers with distinct joints, and a British book. He sat quietly in a wheelchair, and the sun couldn't help but soften a little on his body. Sensing my approach, he looked away from the book and moved the wheel to approach me. This marriage really wronged you. But although I can't give you a normal married life, I won't treat you unfairly. As long as you feel at ease as Mrs. Lu. After saying that, he asked housekeeper Lee to bring a black card and let me swipe it casually in the future. From then on, I was the mistress of the Lu family. I stood still and didn't calm down for a long time. I didn't react until the black card really fell into my palm. Lu Tianong is not only the rumored moody, but also approachable. In this way, my family's debts are hoped to be remanded. The next day I called to go back. so I couldn't wait to rush home to share the good news with them as soon as possible. As soon as I walked to the gate, I heard the disgust of my parents coming from inside. Isn't this girl living a bad life and still wants to come back? That's not good. How can the plague god who was sent out with difficulty let her come back? The younger sister also pouted and complained. Does she regret marrying that cripple for me? Now I want to come back and take away my Zixuan. But Zixuan and I are already together, and it's useless for her to regret it. Is it possible that she knows that Zixuan has given me a lot of money and wants to share a piece of the cake? I listened at the door and my heart was like ashes. It's also a piece of meat that fell from my mother. Why is my sister the baby and I am the plague god? Obviously, I was wronged and married my sister to the Liu family, which she regarded as a tiger's den. Why didn't anyone thank me? I wanted to go in and ask clearly. After I was in a good mood, I knocked on the door. There was a panic sound inside. After a long time, my mother opened the door. She laughed so hard that the wrinkles in the corners of her eyes piled up. It's Yang. Are you homesick after getting married?
Come in.
My mother is as warm as treating guests. I looked at the dinner table that had just been cleaned up, and my heart sank a little. She pulled me to sit down and stroked my hand with a smile. Oh, this rich family is just to raise people. Look, Yang has only been married for a day, and her skin is so delicate. Dad and sister were on the side and nodded like pounding garlic. I looked cold and didn't say anything. They really said it out loud. After my family went bankrupt, I felt sorry for my parents and let them support them at home. I gave up my studies and worked 5 jobs a day, so that I could barely cover the family's expenses and my sister's tuition. Over the years, my hands have long been covered with causes, but they said it delicately and didn't draft a word of nonsense. 3. This kind face almost made me feel that what I heard just standing outside the door was just my imagination. Yang, you have already married. How much is the dowry given to you by the Liu family? My mother finally couldn't help asking what was on her mind. I suddenly realized that it turned out that Feng's intimacy was just for a dowry. I frowned, pulled out my hand and said lightly, Dowry? What kind of dowry? There is no dowry. What kind of dowry do they give? When the driver of the Liu family came to pick me up yesterday, they didn't even want to give me a red envelope. My parents were so speechless because of me. They looked at each other, and their faces were not very good. At this time, Changyu said disdainfully while nibbling on the apple, You are all making money in our family. Where did your parents get the money to give them red envelopes? I laughed coldly. So you also know that I earned the money in the family? Use the money I earned to go to school, buy cosmetics, clothes, jewelry, and let me marry for you. Is this the attitude to me now? Don't you think you're too much? Hearing the words, my mother's face was long, and she hummed cold air from her nose. You are so angry. To put it bluntly, the Liu family doesn't like you and doesn't want to give you a dowry. With that, my mother put her hands around her chest and leaned on the sofa, and even kicked me. If no one wants you to lose money, go back to your crimped husband's house. Changyu swallowed the apple in her mouth and laughed out loud. That's right, get out of here. Fortunately, I didn't marry into the Liu family. Don't you know how considerate Mo Zixuan is? He gives me 20,000 yuan for living expenses every month, and you have to earn 3 months if you work. Dad sat aside and smoked the Chinese cigarette I bought for him, exhaled a breath of turbid air, and said, Yang Zixuan is a good son-in-law. Recently, his family's career has been successful, and someone has helped us pay off our family's debts in the future. You don't need to work so hard. Go back to the Liu family. The blood all over my body was turling at this moment, shouting to tear them all apart, and my voice trembled uncontrollably. I married the Liu family. Didn't I also replace my sister? I just came back. You don't want to give me a glass of water. I know I came back at noon today and had lunch on purpose. Why, I just got married, and my mother's family doesn't have my food. My voice suddenly became higher, which shocked my mother lying on the sofa. She stood up with her hands crossed, pointed at my nose and scolded. You lose money. You have grown up, haven't you? How dare you murder us? Do you think you are a young lady? You were the child I picked up in the trash can. It's right for you to work part-time to support us these years. Pounding. I felt that my heart stopped for a few seconds. Although I knew that I was not loved by my parents, I had never doubted my background. I looked up at my father, and his eyes seemed to ask for verification made him dodge, and he didn't dare to look at me. Changyu turned around proudly, walked into the room, and took out a paternity test report. Nua, see for yourself. You are not a child of the Chung family in the first place. The kindness of upbringing over the years has been repaid as a part-time job. Now that you are no longer a member of the Chung family, don't want to rely on it anymore. 4. I turned over the report's hand and couldn't stop shaking. The doubts in my heart for many years seemed to have been solved at this moment. No wonder my parents favored my sister more since I was a child. After bankruptcy, they let me drop out of school with peace of mind to earn tuition for my sister. I just want to say, how can parents in the world not love their children? They don't love me just because I picked it up. After reading it, I will put away the report, and the tears on my face have dried up. So, my last role is to marry into the tiger's den for my sister? I looked at them calmly and asked the doubts in my heart. My parents avoided their eyes and didn't dare to look at me. Chungyu pushed me and drove me out of the room. What do you think? I have raised you for so many years. It's your honor to marry me. From today on, the Chung family has nothing to do with you. Chungyu stood at the door, guarding the door with her hands with a smug face. I didn't have time to pay attention to her, so I turned up the volume and said something to my parents in the inner room. If you really want to break off the relationship, let's go to the court for notarization. Hearing this, Chungyu quickly clapped her hands and cheered. Mom and Dad agreed quickly. After the notarization, she can no longer share our family property. When I heard her words, I couldn't help laughing. Because of the paternity test, the notarization process is very fast. After coming out of the court, I breathed a sigh of relief. Chungyu happily took her parents to Zixuan, who was looking for her, saying that she wanted the Chung family to rise again. I looked at their leaving backs, and the corners of my lips unconsciously hooked up. That's great. After notarization, they can no longer share the money on the black card. I turned around and walked in the opposite direction to them. Passing by the sales department of Thompson Peen, I swayed in. How many rooms are there left? I want it all. I took the black card and knocked on the counter from time to time. The lady at the front desk was scared by my words. It took a long time to call their manager and serve me in person, saying that he could not neglect the distinguished guests. Since Lu Tianong said that I can spend the money on the black card at will, I will buy a house shallowly. In this way, even if Lu Tianong repents in the future, he can't take away my real estate. Relying on these houses, I can live for the rest of my life. The manager took a group of salesmen to check for half an hour and calculated that there were still 9 sets of cash houses with a total value of 100 million yuan. He gave me a discount and took away 80 million yuan. I didn't hesitate to sign the order and leave, and they would take care of the rest. When I had dinner at Lu's house in the evening, the sales department had already delivered the property certificate to the door of the house. I marveled at the speed of their work, and housekeeper Li was also amazed at the speed of my spending. This Mrs. Lu, you spent 80 million yuan in an afternoon? Housekeeper Li stammered and sneered at my behavior of spending money. I secretly looked up at Lu Tianong. Seeing that he didn't respond at all, I felt a little more secure. It's a waste. The black card was originally for your wife. Lu Tianong gave me a chopstick of fish meat and said indifferently. I lowered my head and ate fish, vowing secretly that I would be good to Lu Tianong in the future. Since I was a child, I have loved to eat fish, but after my family went bankrupt, my time was squeezed to exchange money. I didn't have time to pick thorns, so I never ate fish again. When I entered the door yesterday, I ate an extra chopstick of fish and he wrote it down. Housekeeper Li told me about Lu Tianong's preferences. He doesn't like to eat fish. Chung Yang wrote down this feeling. Point 5. After dinner, a friend verification popped up on my mobile phone. She said that she was also the owner of Thompson Peen and wanted to get to know her. I didn't think too much and agreed to the friend request. She introduced herself and went straight to the point. My name is Xue Lingling. I like to be lively. I'm going to hold a banquet at home tomorrow. Most of the owners will come to attend. I hope to see you tomorrow. I saw that she was humble and polite, and there was no harm in making friends, so I agreed. The next day, after preparing breakfast for Lu Tianong, I put on a casual suit and went to the appointment. I knocked on Xue Lingling's door. I didn't think that the person who opened the door was Chungyu. It should be Zixuan who was holding her arm next to her. Originally, he was only a well-off family, but his father's company seized the opportunity and made a lot of money. Now he is a rich second generation. His eyes fell on me, looking up and down, as if he was looking at his prey, which made me extremely uncomfortable. Chungyu looked at me and frowned to push me out. It's a loss of money. Did you go to the wrong place to deliver takeaways? This is not the place you should come. Xue Lingling came over when she heard the sound and looked at Chungyu doubtfully. Do you know her? Chungyu seemed to open the box, pulling Xue Lingling to complain. Sister Ling, this is the sister I mentioned before who doesn't think about progress. I dropped out of high school and didn't study. After marrying an old cripple for my sister, I became a super rich man 39,103 inch. I don't know what kind of fame she is doing outside. Later, she married the old claim Lu Tianong for money. As soon as this was said, everyone sighed. Chungyu saw that the effect was very good, and he said more vigorously, pointing at me like a proud peacock. If you know each other, get out of here. This is a first-class aristocratic area. which is not for poor people like you to enter. A crisp slap sounded. Changyu's eyes widened and covered her red face in disbelief. Sister Ling, why did you hit me? Changyu shrank into Mo Zixuan's arms and cried, trying to seek a trace of comfort. Men are most afraid of women crying, and Mo Zixuan is no exception. He put Changyu in his arms and swept his reproachful eyes to Xue Lingling. Miss Xue, you hit my friend. Shouldn't you give me an expiration? After saying that, Mo Zixuan glanced at me as if nothing had happened. Xue Lingling held the red wine glass in one hand and laughed softly. Mo Xiao, your friend is blind to Mount Tai and bumped into my distinguished guest. Since you are reluctant to do it, I am the only one who can discipline you. Xue Lingling and I exchanged photos yesterday, so she recognized me. After listening to Xue Lingling's words, Changyu laughed loudly. Puhaha. You said this poor ghost is your distinguished guest? Sister Ling, I'm not talking about you. You open your eyes and have a look. The most valuable thing on this man's body may be the necklace around his neck. But it's only about 100 yuan. Everyone here, which one is not worth millions? Where really doesn't understand. How did this poor ghost become Sister Ling's distinguished guest? Xue Lingling looked at her coldly and said indifferently. Then listen carefully. This lady is a new resident of Thompson Epine, and she has 9 sets of houses in full. 6. The people present are mostly rich second generation, living on the pocket money given by their parents, and they have to work with their parents for a long time to buy a set. No wonder Xue Lingling regards me as a distinguished guest. After listening, Changyu seemed to hear some big joke. He pointed at me and laughed out loud. All you. Full 9 sweets. Changyu covered her painful stomach with a smile, turned her head and said to Xue Lingling, Sister Ling, you must have the wrong person. This person drops out of high school. She can only earn 20,000 yuan in 3 months, and she has spent it all. How can she afford to buy a house here? Xue Lingling wanted to say something, but I raised my hand to stop her. I slowly walked to Changyu and smiled at Mo Zixuan, and he looked at me like an idiot. Sure enough, this man is not a good bird as I thought. I slapped Changyu's face with all my strength. I didn't teach you. Do you have to show some respect to my sister? Since you call me sister, I have to discipline you, lest you be humiliated outside. Changyu's left face was just right, and her right face was hit by me again. She covered her face, and her round eyes were full of shock. Which sister are you from? We have broken off the relationship. What qualifications do you have to teach me a lesson? Looking at her angry look, the corners of my mouth couldn't stop rising. I turned my sore wrist, looked at her funny and whispered, So you also know that we broke off the relationship? Then why are you ruining my reputation everywhere? Allo, why do you question my identity as the owner? You can't afford it. Do you think everyone can't afford it? I'm afraid you can't even enter this door today without you. After saying that, everyone present laughed out loud. They have long seen a strange girl like Changyu just for fun. Mo Zixuan was praised by me, and the smile on his face was full of wrinkles. Obviously, this trick is extremely useful to him. Changyu found something wrong with Mo Zixuan and pulled his arm hard, but he couldn't shake it. He focused his eyes on me. Men are always ticklish about what they can't get. Changyu obviously doesn't know this truth and handed himself over early. I didn't know that this would only make her despised. Zixuan, Yuer has been bullied. You have to help Yuer be the master. Changyu pinched her throat and cried, shaking Mo Zixuan's arm and begging. But Mo Zixuan looked at me absent-mindedly. He frowned slightly, pulled his arm out of Changyu's hand, and said sternly, The people who came here today except for you, are all people with heads and faces. If you mess around again, don't blame me for ignoring my feelings. Changyu didn't seem to expect that her boyfriend, who had always taken care of her, would be so indifferent to her today. She couldn't figure it out. She pouted and tears rolled in her eyes. The twitching look was heartbreaking, but this time Mo Zixuan did not protect her as before. This made Changyu angry and shouted, Mo Zixuan, do you like this woman? You have a marriage contract with me. Are you worthy of me like this? Before Changyu finished speaking, she was slapped in the face. The crisp sound attracted everyone's attention again. Mo Zixuan gritted his teeth with a cold face and said, Changyu, I said, we are just friends. In the past, I took you to play, but I thought you were well-behaved and sensible. Now it seems that there is no need. Come on, see off the guests. Mo Zixuan shouted harshly to the side, and 2 people who looked like security guards immediately walked out of the crowd and dragged Changyu away. 7. After Changyu was solved, Xue Lingling looked at me apologetically. I'm sorry, Miss Chang, I just wanted to get to know you today, but I didn't want to make such an unpleasant fuss. After saying that, she stretched out her hand to me. I smiled and shook hands with her, and the matter was over. After all, Changyu's incident was originally a small episode. The main purpose of my coming here is also to make some connections and leave in more retreat for myself. When Zixuan saw me shaking hands with Shui Lingling, he tidied the tie around his neck and stretched out his hand to me. Zixuan, nice to meet you. I looked at the hand stretched out in front of me, laughed and held it back with my palm. Cheng Yang. Now it seems that my sister's idea of relying on Zixuan to pay off the debt is going to fail. After the banquet, Lu Tianong arranged for housekeeper Li to pick me up. As soon as I arrived at the living room, I saw Lu Tianong looking at me in a wheelchair. He seemed to have drunk today, and his trimmed suit was stained with a faint smell of alcohol. Did you have a good time today? I don't know if it was my illusion, but I saw a faint sadness on his handsome face. I nodded and briefly said what I was going to do. Lu Tianong hummed and left in a wheelchair. Housekeeper Li looked at me and shook his head. He was about to leave several times, but finally he couldn't help telling me, Madam, Master Lu has always had low self-esteem since the accident. If you get too close to other men, the young master will be unhappy. Hearing the words, I knew what he had misunderstood. In the evening, I specially cooked rock candy Sydney and sent it to him. This time it is also the first time between us. He said, if you don't mind, I can come forward to solve this marriage. I squatted down, held his hand, put it at the mouth of my heart and said, now that I, Cheng Yang, have married here, I am not divorced, only widowed. I didn't refuse Zixuan's favor because I wanted to take advantage of him and watch the Cheng family go to a desperate situation with my own eyes. I will tell you my background and don't hide it. I thought he would break up with this in-law. After all, I am not the daughter of the Cheng family. But he just gently touched my head and said softly, if you need it, just tell housekeeper Li. I don't know why Lu Tianong is so kind to me, but I know how to be grateful. For several days in a row, I accompanied him at Lu's house, taking him out to bask in the sun and peeling fruit for him. After a long time, he will also show other expressions in front of me. On the other hand, I, the housekeeper, helped me pay attention to the movements of the Cheng family. After Cheng Yu lost Zixuan's thigh, Cheng's father and mother couldn't sit still. They forced Cheng Yu to snatch Zixuan's heart back. I heard that in order to change Zixuan's mind, Cheng Yu gave him medicine to climb into bed and wanted to conceive his child, but he was thrown out by Zixuan. A slut like him has always been the only one who plays with others. How can he be played by others? Cheng Yu's behavior undoubtedly touched his bottom line. 8. Cheng's father and mother saw that this road did not work, so they blamed the idea on me again. Butler Li raised his hand to look at his watch and said calmly, it's almost time to contact the lady over there. After saying that, a text message popped up from the mobile phone in my pocket. It was sent by Cheng's mother. I couldn't help but give a thumbs up to housekeeper Li, and then read the content of the text message. Yang, it's been a month since you married the Lu family. When will you come back to see your parents? I raised my eyebrows slightly and felt disgusted with the behavior of their still self-righteous parents. After a little thought, I quickly typed a few words on the screen. After doing all this, I put my mobile phone back in my pocket and continued to peel apples for Lu Tianong. In recent days, his appetite has been particularly good. I don't know if it's because of pushing him out to play, which consumes too much energy. After a few days, I thought it was time to go back to watch the drama. I took Lu Tianong's hand and asked him, do you want to watch the play? Lu Tianong's beautiful peach blossom eyes smiled and nodded. Then you have to cooperate with my acting. I raised my face and smiled at him like a sly little fox. 2 hours later, Cheng's family. As soon as Cheng's mother saw me coming, she took my hand and walked in warmly, and did not forget to let Cheng Yu push Lu Tianong into the door. Oh, look at my eldest son-in-law. He is really handsome and talented. You are also really generous. You gave my daughter 9 houses as soon as you made a move. It's really generous. Cheng's mother greeted warmly and asked Cheng Yu to treat Lu Tianong with fruit. I stood in front of the sofa with a dark face. After 24 years of dating, I know very well what they are like. At first, they didn't like Lu Tianong, thinking that he was old, lame and impermanent. Later, I heard from Cheng Yu that Lu Tianong bought me 9 houses, and Zixuan was no longer reliable, so they moved the idea of changing it back. I want Cheng Yu to get a familiar face in front of Lu Tianong, so that Lu Tianong can like her and be willing to pay off her debt. Unfortunately, their wishful thinking was short. From the moment they abandoned me, I will never give him any more room to turn around. I took a step forward, stood in front of Lu Tianong, and pulled the fruit plate from Cheng Yu's hand. Of course I, my wife, have to take care of my husband. I picked up a banana, peeled it and fed it to Lu Tianong. Husband, open your mouth. Lu Tianong turned his face aside and dodged my feeding. He looked at Cheng Yu and said, help me peel an apple. Seeing this, Cheng's mother smiled and pushed Cheng Yu, who was stunned. Cheng Yu, who reacted, ran to the kitchen. At this time, Cheng's father came out of the inner room with a cigarette in his mouth and said seriously, Yang, we are all a family, And I won't talk about two families. Since you have married a good son-in-law, should we help pay off our family's debt? Cheng's father's eyes were cloudy, as if he had been baptized by wind and frost. I remember that before I got married there was still light in his eyes. In this short month the debt destroyed him like this. It seems that if you come to me this time you are really poor in skills. I put the fruit plate on the table and then looked up at them. I want to see how cheeky they are to make such a request. With a cold face I said indifferently, I remember that we seem to have broken off the relationship. 9. When it comes to this matter, Cheng's father and mother's faces immediately sank. Cheng's mother snorted coldly, put her hands on her chest and stopped pretending. You lose money, don't eat the soft one, then eat the hard one. She turned her head and said to Lu Tianong with a smile, good son-in-law. To tell you the truth, this girl is not the daughter of my Cheng family at all. She is just an abandoned baby that I picked up in the trash can many years ago. The person you have an engagement with is my daughter Cheng Yu, not this money-losing person. After hearing this, Lu Tianong raised his eyebrows in surprise. At this time Cheng Yu also came out of the kitchen. She took the peeled apple and handed it to Lu Tianong with a red face. Lu Tianong took the apple and played with it in his hand. This action increased Cheng's mother's confidence. She firmly believes that Lu Tianong will definitely like her daughter. Look, your husband doesn't even want you to serve him. What kind of wife is she? My daughter is so well behaved that she is worthy of being the wife of the Lu family. Seeing that their hope had risen to the peak, Lu Tianong and I looked at each other. He nodded and his magnetic voice sounded loud. You misunderstood. I was just afraid of tiring my wife, so I called your daughter. As for your daughter, she is not related to my wife by blood. Otherwise, why is my wife so beautiful and your daughter so ugly? After all, Cheng Yu was still young and thin-skinned. When she heard this, she cried and hid back in the back room. When Cheng's mother heard this, her eyes were full of incredible. She swallowed her saliva and said nervously, my daughter is so beautiful, can't you see her? Lu Tianong crossed his hands and closed his eyes to pretend to sleep. I know that he doesn't want to pay attention to these ignorant people. Let me sing the end of such a good play. I took out a document bag from my hand and threw it on Cheng's father and mother's face. Here there is a clear list of the money you spent to raise me, and the money transferred to you from my part-time job. After calculating, you still owe me 100,000 yuan after paying off the child-up fee. Not much, but please give it back to me, otherwise, I will go through legal procedures. Cheng's mother still wanted to splash, tore the document to pieces, and asked me to pay her debt. Housekeeper Li. I shouted out of the door. Housekeeper Li appeared in response to the voice. I'll leave the next thing to you. After saying that, I pushed Lu Tianong away. Cheng's mother still wanted to catch up, but was stopped by Housekeeper Li. One sunny afternoon, Lu Tianong and I basked in the sun by the fish pond and felt the joy of fishing. Housekeeper Li reported to us on the recent situation of the Cheng family behind him. The creditors of the Cheng family collect debts day by day, and their rent is due. They can't renew the rent. The landlord drove them all away. In order to continue their studies, one became a security guard and the other became a nanny. While listening, I raised my wine glass and toasted with Lu Tianong. Cheers! By the way, Mo Zixuan came to see his wife several times and wanted to invite her to dinner. Butler Li's words successfully made Lu Tianong's face black. Recently, Mo's company has fewer things to do. He still has time to visit my wife. Lu Tianong said in a low voice. Housekeeper Li understood in a second and retreated, preparing to find something to do for Mo's company. The sun was setting, and the hook moved on the rippled water.